It's a beautiful spring day here in Canberra, so I'm off to the town of Griffith with my good mate Martin to meet up with the Master Carver Hape Kiddle. Griffith is in the centre of New South Wales, and like Canberra, it was designed by the American architects Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin. Griffith's often considered the food bowl of Australia, an irrigation area famous for its citrus, its grapes and its rice. I'm flying the Beach Duchess today and we'll be cruising over at 6,500 feet, out over the Brindis and out over the plains of central New South Wales. Hape's a maker's maker. We met at a wood show back in about 2015 and I've watched his practice flourish over the last decade. He's now one of Australia's leading carvers and his work is collected locally and internationally. He's been the visiting artist at so many wood schools and he's influenced a whole wave of carving enthusiasts, including me and Martin. Hape was born in Aotearoa and has Māori heritage. His family moved to Australia while he was still a youth, and I think his work reflects a range of aspects of his unusual life. Hape did an apprenticeship as a jeweller before studying furniture at the University of Tasmania, down in Hobart. He met his wife Janine while travelling through Darwin, and for a while they lived in Hobart before moving back to her hometown of Griffith. After many years of developing his craft, Hape's now found the sweet spot, a way to balance his practice. He's the most relaxed and focused I've ever seen him, and it's being reflected in his current work. Hape's very private about his workspace, and rightly so. It's his special place, it's his magic spot, so we're extremely fortunate to have him share his world with us. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Well, thanks so much for having us out here, Hape. It's so nice. We flew out from Canberra and we had a beautiful view of Griffith coming in and wow, some beautiful big houses out here. How long have you been out here, man?
I think I've lived out here since about 2010, so that's 14 years now.
And that's because Janine's people are out here?
Yeah, so Janine's family came out, her father managed grape farms and so yeah, we wanted to be around the whānau, around the family. So when we had 2 young children in Tasmania, we decided to move out to where Janine's family is.
Awesome. And we're out at Peter's place. What's the name of this vineyard?
Oh yeah, so we're at Peter Piccolo's. So this is Piccolo's farm.
Right.
And it's got a little vineyard, whole bunch of activities happen out here, and then they've got the restaurant in town that we visited earlier, Lamoni Restaurant.
Lamoni was wonderful.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you can see behind us, guys, there's a church that's been relocated here and they use it as a function centre and so on. And Peter, who owns the place, is just a human dynamo. He just collects and rebuilds and repurposes, and he's a greenie before he knew what greenies were.
Yeah, I think so.
And so with your carving practice out here, do you find being in Griffith works for you or against you, or what's it like?
I think it can be a little bit of both, Evan. I think there's something to be said for that splendid isolation, for really being able to go inside your work and not having too many things to pull you away, too many disturbances.
Yep, too many people dropping in and wasting your time.
Yeah, that can happen. Maybe not so often out here. You almost have to get on a plane to do so.
Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to access galleries, market, etc. But yeah, but you can really dig into your work, really fall into your processes.
Yeah. And do you find that having a conversation with the audience more broadly, because you're now doing audio Skype, not Skype, what is it?
Yeah, Zoom, yeah.
Zoom classes and so on. That's allowed you to not make these heroic drives and park up away from the family and so on. So that's sort of working for you?
Yeah, that is. So back in 2020, there was something that happened. I can't remember what it was, but the whole COVID thing really led to having to make some changes and to think on my feet, which I think is quite the norm for what we do, is that you do have to be quite dynamic in your thinking.
Yeah.
So COVID led me to start a series of Zoom classes, which has continued to now and will continue onwards. And that has done exactly that. It's allowed me not to travel away from home in order to engage students in various locations.
But you were saying that now that the Zoom stuff is sorted out, that's actually freeing you up to be creative again. And now that you're sort of, you've got that happening and it's more regular and it's more predictable, that's actually freed you up to be more creative again?
Yeah, it has. It has. Ultimately, when you're stuck in that survival mode as you can in the arts, it does eat into that creative part of your mind. It does absorb a lot more of your mental resources. So yeah, currently the Zoom does allow me to really fall into my processes to get my work where I want it to be, rather than chasing. I'm able to sit back and take the time that good work requires or requests of you. Yeah.
This is something, talking to Bob Howard and Terry Gordon and Damien Wright down in Victoria, they all talk about, finding that professional rhythm and finding the space to be truly creative, because people don't realise that if you or I or any of these guys just go full-time teaching, it actually sucks the energy out of us. We can only, speaking for myself, but we can only offer snippets of what we do, because so much of our time is like this, just doing the work. How do you feel about young carvers coming along at the moment, especially in the current climate?
I'm seeing a lot of people carving, but I would think that the degree of dedication it takes to get good at your craft it's a whole nother thing. Like, I think we've touched on in other conversations, is that when someone is spending 3, 4, 5 hours a week carving, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
I think I've had at least a decade now of 40-hour weeks plus at the bench, literally just carving all of the time. I think it's one of those things where you want to get to the point where you don't think about it. Your hands can pretty much move without any thought, and then you can really stay inside that work rather than think, how do I do? You just do.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen you walking around wood shows just carving without even looking where your hands are going. And the first thing I bought of yours was that little lipped vessel. And I could tell that you held it in your left hand, because I can actually feel the left hand bias in the shape. I can feel how that piece spoke while you were carving it. I think that's one of the things that worries me a bit at the moment, is that people like yourself and us and, Damien Wright and all these guys, the number of people who actually make a full-time living by making and selling, to me feels like it's diminishing. And we're seeing a lot of people who, a whole range of things, of which being productive is part. But for craftspeople who make their living from making and selling, I don't know. I think we're in a weird transition position where people are starting to value our knowledge more than our objects. And for me, the objects are the thing. How do you feel about that?
So for me, the audience has always been secondary.
Yep.
In a way, I think my carving life and my approach to it has been quite selfish. It's been, I do it at all costs,
yep. And
I hope that the world bends to it. Now, of course, that's not particularly realistic. So I'm not carving for the audience, but I hope the audience shows up. And I don't know how that works for anyone else in terms of their practice. But that's how I've generally approached it, and that's forced me to be quite dynamic when it does come to selling the work or engaging audiences. I've had to learn about social media, for example. But yeah, absolutely. But first and foremost, I have always simply found a way. How do I get the time to be able to do the work that I want to do?
But when you're working, you might be a little bit informed by, the last one sold well, I'm going to play down in that space. But you don't chase a market. You don't chase, you just, from what I've seen, you tend to chase a form that interests you rather than one that you think.
Totally. Totally.
seed pod vessels.
Off that thought, so I don't chase the success. I remember spending a great deal of time with painters, very good painters.
Yep.
And they would have a success with a particular area of painting. It might be seascapes, for example. Mm-hmm. And then that artist would just stay on that because that's what the audience was buying. And I would see that rot their love of what they did.
Yep.
And so that was really informing in that you could take something that you love and destroy it by responding solely to the market. And so in a way, I've almost gravitated when I see something as highly popular, highly successful, I either want to extend what it is rather than stay where it's at, or absolutely abandon it for something else. Yeah. So I really appreciate, like when 9 people say, hey, I really like that, and one other person goes, oh yeah, but I'm really interested in the, oh yeah, but.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me moving. It's you never want to be entirely comfortable in terms of what you're making. It's from my point of view.
One of the things I've always found difficult about, gallery spaces and so on is that I don't get to see the response to the work.
Mm.
And I've seen people, when we've been in a space together like Lost Trades, and I'll see somebody come up to your work and they might know nothing about carving, they might not know who you are, but I see their eyes light up and you can't fake that bit. It's that response. We're always after that raw emotional response where somebody's eyes light up and they resonate with the work. Because, art's the most important thing to us. Every culture, the artists are always the core of the culture. And yet it's still a difficult way to get people to feel like they have permission to buy good work. You know how some people they don't have to justify it to themselves. They go, I love that, and they'll spend the money. But others are thinking, I'm not going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on art. And yet it's those impulse buys when you really resonate with something and buy it that you really treasure.
Yeah, look, again, I think we've touched on this in other conversations. I think you need to be in the presence of work for the magic of it to speak.
Yep.
We can take great shots for our social media. We can have great magazine articles, but when I meet an object, when I'm actually in its presence, that's when that's when that magic happens. That's when your eyes alight. That's when that connection happens. And with everything I make, I'm reaching out to the world. I'm in conversation. I always like to say that I'm looking for the dialogue, not the monologue. So
it's the tactile experience of your work, which is so core. I mean, those forms are just so tactile. They're really, your stuff is sculpture for blind people because it's such a beautiful feel.
Yeah, mate.
I can't photograph that.
No, you can certainly create echoes from it, but that's all shadows. But I think that's a lot to do. Like I'm really big about making in the hand. So even a big object, I'm going to cuddle into the object and work it through that connection. And I know that allows my hands to speak through the object because for the very same reason. Like I remember that little piece of myrtle that you're talking about, that little bowl, and I did indeed walk around carving it at the wood show in my hands.
Yeah.
In fact, with a 7L20 chisel, like the same chisel I still use day in, day out, and just a whittling knife and again, born of the hands.
And I know when we were at Mullaney this year, William and I were talking to Terry Gordon and we were sitting around the fire having a chat, and he was mortally offended because a fella in Brisbane, and I won't say who, and I don't want to embarrass them, but he was presented in some literature as a plane maker. Now, I don't know how many hand planes Terry Gordon's made, but it's thousands. And Terry's a plane maker. And this chap, who makes a perfectly good plane, he probably makes 6 or 8 a year. And that's just a different relationship with the craft to where Terry's coming from. And he was concerned that social media and Instagram and so on can so influence how we perceive the craft. And people imagine what the job is. They don't realise that you are on the tools 40 hours a week. That's when you're actually on the tools, and that's not taking the time all the other things that you do. But, you know, I've always thought of woodwork as a job. Are you in that same headspace?
I'm in agreement in terms of the viewpoint in, in social media and the misrepresentation of what it actually takes.
Yep.
I don't actually consider it a job.
Okay.
I consider it a lifestyle. Like, and I don't mean a lifestyle as I'm going surfing in the morning, I'm doing this. It's something that speaks directly from my soul. It's the reason, or one of the many reasons I get up in the morning. I never go to work feeling like I'm going to work. If anything, I feel like I'm going to a big playground, and that doesn't mean that it's easy, because it isn't.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that I have to go. I feel I want to go, and that's that's a very different way to feel about your life.
I tend to think that we're a little bit in the same place that sports people are, where, a great footballer or a tennis player has to love football and tennis.
Yes.
But when they go to work as a professional footballer or tennis player, they've got to be working within the professional parameter.
Absolutely.
That takes.
It's a nice analogy. I'll jump in on that, because what I like about that analogy is that I know professional sports people, yep, and the level of anxiety that they have to get the next game, to be in the next game, not to be dropped, etc.
Yep.
Means that they have to be at the top of their game week in, week out, week in, week out. And that is something that I certainly have in terms of when I approach the bench, when I get in and I'm doing a job. I never allow myself to drop that level of concentration down, or the intent on a particular piece has to be as good as it was 3 months ago, 3 years ago. The intention has to be absolute, that you're going to create the very best piece that you've created. And so I approach every piece like this is the piece that really matters more than all the other pieces. And I try to hold that at the very core. There's no, let's just turn that out because we need to turn some work out. Let's give every piece what it's asking, what it deserves.
I know you were saying that you've picked up some wonderful big art commissions, call them institutional commissions.
That I'll be institutionalised afterwards. Yeah, sure.
No, but
yeah, they are. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your relationship with that type of work?
My relationship?
Well, do you feel intimidated by it, or are you grateful for it, or is it a combination of both?
It's definitely both. And if you ask me at a different time of the day, you might get a different response. I tend to find that I have that habit that I bite off more than I can chew, and chew like buggery, and I've always done that. I am absolutely intimidated by the most part, and so I just break it down into small pieces. I think the vast majority of what we do as artists involves a discipline of being able to break everything down and zero in on the job on the day. If I start thinking about the outcomes and not the process, and I'm not deeply involved in the process, and the outcomes don't come. So it's exactly like, going back to sport analogies. When you're on the field, you're not thinking about the outcome of the game. You're thinking of your job at that moment, and I do that. And I even to the point that I isolate my time into units, and that I work in 50-minute units and I take 10 minutes off. I work in a 50-minute unit, I take 10 minutes off. And when I'm in that unit, if I'm only doing, say, this area of the carving, that's all I'm doing. This does not exist, this does not exist, that does not exist, because if I do this part of the job right, that's going to inform the next part.
Yeah, right. Yeah, one of the things I've found I have staff, and at the minute you put staff into the mix, it changes your relationship with what you do. But I found the last 12 months the hardest for my personal... The reason I've taken up carving, which you introduced me to at Carol and Stuart.
Oh, yeah, that's right, Hartwood, yeah.
It actually gave me a chance to play with wood again and have that really direct relationship. Because I find when I'm in the workshop and I'm, running the business, running the team, worrying about clients and all of that, in a way I've been promoted to my level of incompetence, and I'm running a business, not being in the moment, being in the craft. I find the concentration a lot harder, whereas I find it much easier with the carving to just be in the moment. So you really have that lovely... are there times when the day just flies by?
Every day, I would say, every day, yeah. Those units are particularly effective for for being able to get the work done. So I won't answer the phone, I won't do an email or anything in those units. So they're good for that. But I will look at the clock, it'll be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or I'll go and have lunch. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll go, I've still got 3 hours, and then all of a sudden it's 5. And that's it, day is done. And I always feel like I haven't really achieved that much today. I just haven't, got where I wanted to go.
Yep.
So I always feel like I'm running slow when in fact I'm actually quite quick. But no, the day is never long enough because I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm often disappointed that the day is over.
Are you able to switch off after a day's carving when you get home and you've gone from carving mode to husband and dad mode?
It depends on the project. There are times when I will actually take the piece home, not to work on, but just for it to sit in the corner and keep glaring at me, and then occasionally look across and give it a bit of attention. I might take a piece home to see what my wife thinks about it.
Is she a good?
No, she's terrible. She's got a great eye, but she's seen enough. It's like she's had 15 years of me probably bringing stuff home and going, can you just be here? Originally, I had my workshop at home.
Yeah.
I don't do that now because it is important to step away.
I've never wanted a workshop at home for that very reason. I think I would never be truly at work or truly at home. So I'm much better off
Separating
keeping the workshop separated. Although I must confess, I've got a lovely shed. I've got a bigger shed than most professional woodworkers I could theoretically set up at home. For me, weirdly, that would feel like a compromise, like a cop-out. But that's tied back to that whole, wanting to be at work and not at work. I think some of the most successful craftspeople are the ones who are the most disciplined, that they do the whatever your day looks like, your 40 hours, and don't work till 3 a.m. and don't stress themselves out. The late Jim Homan, who was just a phenomenal wood turner, and he supplied the Woodworks Gallery for years. He was unbelievably disciplined. The light went on at 8 o'clock in the morning. He worked all day. He worked at 110%. He did similar to what you did. He had structured breaks. He was like a shearer, always looking for that extra sheet. But the minute the bell went, he put the
tools down, go,
and suddenly he was a husband and a father again.
Yeah.
And I think that's takes a lot of discipline and a lot of focus, I think, to achieve that.
I think so often it's the unseen in what we do that makes the difference. So we can circle back to the Instagram, is that it's relatively easy to make something look good through a group of filters and get in the right angle, on a particular piece. But it's the discipline. Like everything for me comes back to that discipline. I've come across so many makers who think it's an easy path, or other people, particularly in the arts. Oh, don't you just eat pizza and start work at 12 o'clock in the day and do hardly anything? Well, in fact, I think the level of discipline that I have in my practice is greater than anything I've ever known and any other job that I've ever had. You have to absolutely show up. You have to stay on the job, and there's no mercy. It's like,
if this is the good option, what the hell do the bad options look like? It's hard work, man.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's as simple as that. So if you're going to get into the arts on any level, I think you've got to have a heck of a work ethic.
I think we both share a very mixed relationship with Instagram and things like that, because, I love the fact that I can get on Instagram and see what you're up to and see what the people I think of as being the makers I respect, that I'm interested in. Respect's probably not the right word, but, I want to see what you're doing, and I want to see what, other makers are doing in real time. But we're so flooded with the white noise of, there's a lot of white noise on Instagram. I have a very mixed relationship with it. And do you think it's had a big impact on your capacity to be viable?
I think, look, it's been a positive for sure.
Yep.
I think it was Peter Adams, the amazing wood carver. I think we had a conversation maybe a decade ago about social media, and he had just started using it, and he made a reference to putting good things out into the world. Like, yes, it's not necessarily a clean form of communication, but you're best to saturate it with good things and truth than not be on it at all.
Aled Lewis, one of the greatest makers in the world, his Instagram following is relatively modest because he's spending his time teaching or making or, whatever. So that relationship with Instagram, I think, can be very weird. I have a very conflicted relationship with any of that social media. He said videoing, having come on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hang on about it.
Yeah. I don't think you'd give power to anything particularly. I still think it's always about the work. Mm-hmm. And I really do subscribe to Seth Godin's idea that you find your minimum viable audience, that you just find the people who want to be on the journey with you, that are actually interested in what you're doing. Yep. And if I'm putting that up on social media, I'm not particularly concerned on how many people are jumping on and liking something, etc., because it only takes one person to actually reach out and say, hey, I love that, I'm really interested in that, and that person matters. So it's the early Cubist poets.
I think it's given us the freedom as craftspeople to have that direct conversation with our clients, and that is gold dust.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's taken a lot of the filters out of the game. I'm sure you've had this, I've had this, where interior decorators will contact you, or, and they're not going through a gallery, they're going to you directly, or the client thereof has said to their, I've had this happen where a client has said to a decorator, I want a piece of this person's work, this is what their Instagram is, and they contact you from there. So there's a lot of direct opportunity with an audience, with individuals, but I'm just careful not to allow any sort of emotional sort of override from that one way or the other. It's a mechanism. It's lovely to communicate. I have some really lovely back and forth messages with people, but at the end of the day, I go into my workshop and I make the work, and it's about the work and it's about the narrative behind the work.
I think that's one of the weird things about being an artist is, my wife works in finance. Nobody's going to film her doing a database, and yet there's now the assumption that everything. When I first started talking about Patreon, Alex and William's first reaction was, "We're not show ponies, and we don't want to be filmed all the time." And I totally get that. I don't want to do it much myself either, but I do think that we have an opportunity to have a more mature conversation now with people who are interested in craft from a professional level, and that's something that social media and so on has given us.
Yeah, look, I think it's that thing where we don't need to change what we do, we're just showing more people what we do.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Teaching in a different way. I mean, I've always enjoyed teaching apprentices. I love having staff and training staff and seeing staff grow, but my big advantage is I get to choose them. So I know, if I don't think they're going to be good enough, they're gone. I only get to train really clever. It's, like being the coach of a sports team. You've got to be good enough to get selected, and then you can guide what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
Speaking of tables, talk to me about this one.
Okay. Well, so we're sitting at a rather lovely table because it's from the original Hamilton Bakery in Tasmania, which was the capital of Tasmania before Hobart. It's hewn pine, and it's got all the burn marks and scratch marks and push marks of a table used in a bakery from the 1800s. And I absolutely love and adore this table, and it belongs to Peter Piccolo and the family. In fact, their family had dinner around this table from when they were tiny onwards, and it used to, because it's actually quite low, it's up on wheels at the moment, but it's actually quite a low table. So the whole family love and know this table, and it spent about 3 years in my studio as my work table. So if there was ever an object that I was going to steal from someone, this is probably it, actually. We might pop it in the back of the car later.
And you might need it.
Absolutely. Yeah, true. Oh, we'll hold it on the roof. But yeah, I absolutely adore this object. I think, I mean, like a lot of the timber that we work in, I absolutely love trees. Trees are my favourite thing. To work in the bones of trees and timber, I'm only just sort of entering the story. And a hewn pine, of course, thousands of years of life, and a good hewn, a couple of thousand plus. So before I even start carving like this bit of hewn here, we've got 300 odd years of life in this one piece of wood. So before I even start my conversation, I'm starting with a bit of wood that's outseen colonisation. In just this little cut of it, not even the tree. So for me, there's a reverence in that, and all my work is about speaking back to that. It's about speaking back to those values and our place in the biological world as a creature that shares it.
It's certainly one of the things that is a big challenge to us as wood. I mean, Australia is lucky that we still have native timbers that we can get access to. And we were talking earlier about how, the Gidgee and those desert timbers are still available because there was never really an industry around them. Agriculture, I suppose, destroyed a lot of habitat. But we haven't really had a very mature conversation in Australia about the importance of natural forests, both as a cultural resource as well as an economic resource. The same person who would be against cutting down a tree would really resonate and value your work and my work. Well, you can't have it both ways. We have to think about how we value a standing tree, and culturally, when we're prepared to cut it down and when we're prepared to preserve it.
Yeah, look, it's a tangly question. So I'll use an example as an illustration. So not far from here, where those trees like the Gidgees, the Western Miles, the Yarrans, those desert acacias, where they grow, they're often just pushed down for a fence line. Yeah. And then that's it. They lie there. And so they haven't been respected. They haven't been seen as a resource. They've been seen as something in the road.
Yeah, an obstacle.
An obstacle, that's right. The hewn pine that I'm carving right now is part of that hewn pine that's broken away from under the water and has been gathered from that process. So that's what this particular piece is. And that's not to say that that's a very imperfect place to come from as well. But if we leave it sitting, or if we ignore it, if we sell it for cheap objects, in no way does that honour the story of the forest or the trees, etc. And so I liken it to the idea that how do I then make this object sing out into the world to continue its meaning, to extend itself out into the world, that it speaks of those forests, that it speaks of those places. So at the moment there's a very raw form, but I'm speaking of the seed that, the idea that something so small can encompass something so large, that something so small that we can hold in our hand holds such importance. And so I would hope that my work personally changes some of the dialogue, or at least leans in the right way for the dialogue, and speaks back to how valuable that thing actually is. For me, a forest is my cathedral. We wouldn't go knocking down the local Anglican church or the Catholic church, and yet we'll knock a forest down for $9 for a ton of wood. Yeah. And so that to me is an absolute insult to the living world that we're in. So yeah, there is that tension always when you're utilising that resource. So it's how we approach it, it's how we see it, it's how we value it. If we're simply running a clear-felled chain and ripping an entire forest down for one group of species, then I don't think we understand what we're looking at.
No, well, one of the, in those big fires a few years ago, a lot of pine forests got destroyed, and they were right at the mature end of their cycle. And of course, all those pine forests are on country which was once native forest. And so now we've lost the resource twice, because, the native forests have been cleared. We haven't chosen to reinvest in reforesting that land. We've put non-native pines on it, and then that's been destroyed. And sort of we're in this cycle now where we're seeing trees more and more, or land more and more, just in terms of economic production, rather than all the different elements that it brings to the table. Says the guy who just burned a few dinosaurs flying out here from Canberra.
Evan, I wonder, like, first and foremost, to say, what are our values?
Yeah.
And then what are our abilities? And I think our abilities aren't being explored in terms of how we approach environment, our abilities to manage, our abilities to utilise. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that's simply by design. It's what we're doing right now is easy, it's economical, it's been done for a long time, but it's non-imaginative, and I don't think it's sustainable. So in current forest management, and I'm not an expert in the field, but I only have to drive through an area that's been clear felled to be able to say there's nothing correct about that. Because that's not just a whole bunch of trees together, it's an entire environment. That's thousands of species and plants that we don't even know the edge of. Yeah. For quick extraction, for money making, we've got to do better. And we deserve to do better. To be honest, we deserve it. What's going on now is simply about the dollar, and it's not about environment. It's not about us.
It's not about lifestyle either, because something that blows me away is that now that we've commodified our houses, and our houses are seen as an investment and an economic game of one-upmanship, the number of massive houses that are filled full of rubbish objects blows my mind. And I don't know, if I meet somebody in the street and they say, "What do you do?" and I say, "I'm a contemporary fine furniture maker," they'll say, "Oh, I've got a rich uncle who'd love your stuff." And yet our best work has gone into very ordinary houses with people who just understand, whose value system, who understands our value proposition. Our value proposition is that we will make stuff with heart, and they get to buy that work. The same way that a chef goes to more trouble than you can imagine to prepare a beautiful dish and an environment and a space for you to come with your friends and family and just have a convivial moment. And not only not have to cook, but surprise you in so many levels. What we do is essentially making an object that has layers of surprise in it, and that's taken 25 years of experience to produce. And when somebody lives with that in their house, and every time they sit in a chair or pick up a sculpture or whatever, they're buying into our vision of what a beautiful world we live in.
Yeah, I always liken it to the object I want to make. I hope that it reaches out and touches someone's soul, and then they not only live with that object, they protect that object. And if that object is going somewhere else, they gift that object, and they gift part of themselves. If you just want an object, there's $2 shop down the road. Yeah, if you want something just to hold something, $2 shop. But if you want something to hold a story, if you want it to have meaning, do you want it to have longevity, to be passed down generations, that is that 25 years experience. That is that pouring your life into a practice. I love that idea that it's about the practice, and the practice leads to art. That you practice your craft. The whole idea that craft and art are two different things. Well, no, I see it as that you practice your craft until it leads to art. I don't want to spend my life making just more pointless objects for the world. I want to make the objects that speak of the world.
Yeah, I've got to have resonance.
Yeah.
I always talk to my staff about being free of technique, getting to the point where you're not intimidated by doing anything. You're not cutting a dovetail because it's a challenge. You're cutting a dovetail when the dovetail is the most appropriate thing. People mistake craftsmanship for accuracy, and it's not accuracy. It's, we are surrounded here in this space with craftsmanship. Everything Pete's done is done with intent. The hand of the maker is everywhere in this space. And in the restaurant, which name has temporary?
Limoni.
Yep. Limoni. So Limoni is really a temple to repurposing and valuing old. And that's something that I find really interesting, that, you can have such a well-considered space that, God, yeah, Pete spent 8 years building it, but the previous 15 years collecting it.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
That's very cool. We also talked about how places like Griffith and back in the day Queanbeyan offered nutters like us opportunity because, you know, it was easier to be poor in Queanbeyan, you know, when I was living in Bungendore and, you know, we bought our first house, and back in those days Bungendore was, you know, farm worker, nutter, artist, and I won't tell you whether I was the nutter or the artist.
Yeah, I could figure it out for myself.
The nature of these communities evolves, and that's just how the world works. But I get the sense that here at Griffith there's still opportunity. You can play. It must feel a combination of isolated in a bad way and isolated in a good way.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that travels without good and bad. I think that a lot of artists, and I actually know a lot of artists that have moved out to the regions for this very reason, is that it is still viable for them to be able to live and practice. Yeah. You know, obviously your costs of living increase, your rental, etc. in cities. You know, we're being pushed out. You're perhaps experiencing that in somewhere like Queanbeyan that's so close to a major city, to Canberra. It has enabled me to have a practice out here. I mean, I was very fortunate to start my full-time in Hobart at the time in Tasmania when, again, it was viable. I know that if I was to go back and expect the same conditions in South Hobart that I had back then, I'd be dreaming. There's no way I could maintain that lifestyle of full-time practice plus university. So yeah, there's definitely fantastic benefits to being outside of the main centres, and I do like it here. You know, like if someone was to ask me what I love about this place most in terms of its environment, I'm used to mountains and rivers. I grew up on mountains and rivers both in Australia and in Aotearoa, and here I am where you can barely see a hill. There's no river, but there's flats, and so the sky has become my landscape. And just about every night we have the most amazing sunsets that move in ways that I've never seen elsewhere. I mean, I remember being in Sydney or outside of Sydney at the Royal National Park, and my mate goes, "Look at that sunset," and I looked up and went, "Meh," because like we've got 3/4 of our sky here is our landscape. Like you know, otherwise it's pretty much this flat horizon.
Yeah, well, you're in that interesting situation where you've got that cultural input from New Zealand, which is both. It's New Zealand and Australia has that well-known brother relationship where everything's recognisable, and yet New Zealand, from a geography perspective, is just so different.
Oh,
so
massively
different. New Zealand is so young and raw. To me, when I go to New Zealand, it feels like it popped out of the ocean last Wednesday, whereas in Australia, you can smell the age.
Yeah, yep.
It's like the bones. Yep. It's like the bones of a mighty dinosaur or something. It's amazing.
Yeah, I always find that. So I'll get back to Aotearoa, and the vibration, the frequency is just so much higher. Everything jumps up. Things grow fast. You know.
Yep.
And then I come back here and it's almost a slow droning music to it. I mean, almost like the Yaraki, the Didge, which both you and I play. And so I find that, very, very different environments. And, and back home, like, with the mountains and the rivers, I mean, the first thing we do with our whakapapa, our genealogy, is we actually name our mountain and we name our river as our relatives. Mm-hmm. So for me, that connection is, that understanding is something I bought here, and when I was we moved out to a property on the Namoy River with big granite boulders and so on. And so in a way that became the same. It became like a relation, part of my family, because I felt very different about landscape that way. And then here it's taken me a long time to grow into that understanding of what this landscape is for me. Mm-hmm. It probably took me a decade to realise that I had a love for this place, the physical place. There was that resistance that it wasn't familiar, it wasn't right, what was wrong. You look for all the wrongs in the place, and then eventually I remember coming in and, flying back and driving down the road in these twisted eucalypts, these low twisted eucalypts, and I just looked at them and it was like I was seeing friends again.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm so glad to see you, And that's when I realised that I'd fallen into this landscape, that I'd given it enough time for it to embed into me. Yeah. Like a carving, like good work, it takes time. You have to give it the time. You can't assume that you're mates or that you have an understanding just because you're standing there. You need to give it the time that it asks for.
Yeah, relationship with country is so challenging. I mean, I spent a year in Burke, and I can remember driving home and seeing hills again, and the joy I took in seeing hills, like just driving through hilly.
Well, it's a strange feeling, isn't it, after having had it?
And then, I haven't lived out west for a long time, but now that I'm back into flying, I just miss...
Sure.
I didn't realise I'd missed the expanse as much as I did. This big sky country. And, agriculture has been really hard on this land, but it's also... I do feel like we're getting slightly better culturally at... we've done enough damage now that the farming seems to be coming full circle, and there's a lot more farmers out there who are starting to listen to the land better. But I flew out to White Cliffs last year, and by the time you get to Cobar and then you fly out to White Cliffs, there's just kilometre after kilometre of the same country. It's dead flat, it's riddled in goats and wild boar, but it's such big sky country. It's just, it's monumental in a way that's very hard to describe. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't spent any time out there, and most certainly haven't flown over a lot. So I don't know that country. I certainly know this bit, but
gives you a very different perspective of the country when you see it from the air. But it's not the same as living with it. Yeah.
So I mean, I've flown over all the your deserts, etc. Particularly as I head up to the territory for jobs and so on. Yeah, I've flown over that sort of country numerous times, and it's stunning and it's beautiful and it's ancient and it's full of secrets, But because I haven't stood there for any deal of time, I can't feel it so much in that deeper way,
On a different note, I know you've been teaching in New Zealand at the school in Nelson, and you've also taught at Sturt and so on. Where do you see the place within the craft to those sorts of schools? I have a fairly conflicted relationship with the schools because I love the people, I love the infrastructure, I love the optimism. I'm just not sure it's the best way to train craftspeople.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the best way. I'm open to alternatives, but I have the love for the places and the people as well. And right now, without them, I'd be more concerned than how we're sitting with them. So,
we've come dangerously close to losing Sturt. And it's made me realise that although I've been critical at times, the thought of losing it is chilling, because it really would be a declaration that craft doesn't matter.
Look, I think there's an element in certain makers, and I'd like to think both of us, where we're seeking perfection, and it's so easy in life to sit back and be critical about something, but if the better part of me would go, well, rather than be critical, why don't I just jump in? And we can only jump into so many things. So time's not easy.
Well, certainly when a young person comes to me and says, how would I do this professionally? Where would I go? And I always say get an apprenticeship. But in the next breath, there's only like 5 or 6 people in the country that I would recommend that you get an apprenticeship with. And, Alex, who works for me, he's been working for me for 18 years. William's coming on to 10 years. Ardity's coming on to 2 years. But there was an 8-year between each apprentice. And because, I can't afford to train any faster. Rolf, who used to work for me, is doing wonderful things these days. In fact, he's about to take on the Woodworks Gallery as the manager. And I'm very proud that the influence has gone through that. You know, William will always be designing and making, even if I get beamed up by aliens tomorrow. But I'm not sure how you could ever take on an apprentice and train somebody in the same way because of the intense personal nature of what you do. Do you ever think about that?
I'd actually say no.
Yeah.
And not that I couldn't do it or that it couldn't happen, but the nature of my work requires a certain degree of quietness. So, you know, I do imagine, for example, if I'm doing a large public commission and I can find carvers that I can give direction to, like cut that bit away, take that bit away, take that bit away, bit like Bill Reed in the Raven piece in Vancouver, then that's possible. But in terms of training someone, no, I don't think I'd do it. More based on myself needing that certain type of space when I'm working. And the other part is that I mean, so every 8 years you've ended up with an apprentice, but as you know, it takes a huge amount to find the right person. And for what you look for, one of the things that I would be looking for is things I can't train in someone.
Absolutely.
And so it's about 1 in every 100 people in my carving experience, I come across and I go, oh, you've got the eye. And that's the eye I don't have to train. I don't have to explain how to break down the most base form because your eye already sees it and can replicate it. That's a rare thing.
Absolutely. I'm always looking for a temperament, and I really don't want them to know anything at all.
Yeah.
I when Ardity came to me, they had done a bit at a sort of a mixed shed, and I thought, oh my gosh. And they were a bit older than I, you know, William and Alex were both, 16, 17. Ardity was early 20s. And I really worried that, they were too old to start, which sounds terrible, but you think, you've got to mould, you've got to train a person in such a fundamental way, but to everybody's delight, that hasn't been a problem. That's been the hardest thing, being an employer. I've had to dismiss people over the years, and that's easily the worst aspect of this job by a country mile, is having to let somebody go for all sorts of reasons. And it took me probably 10 years to learn what to look for. I made a lot of employing mistakes early on, and then fortunately stopped making the mistakes. Or rather, understanding that I'd made a mistake early and saying, this is actually going to do you harm to stay and do this. Mate, so we should wind it up, but, what's the 5-year plan for Hape?
I probably would have answered that like 10 years ago, survive the next 5 years.
Yeah.
But no, actually, I think at this stage, I'm planning to run my Zooms for 5 years, for classes, and build the structure around that 5 years where I can really just carve thereafter. So I think that I'm interested for the next while taking on public commissions, large work, which was always the intention. I'm moving across to figurative carving, so the human form, which is... Wow. In fact, you're the only person that I've mentioned that to publicly, really. So there you go. So I am actually on a little bit of a journey towards the figurative, because it's something I've always wanted to do. And it actually came up in conversation with Bob Howard, because I said to Bob, oh, when did you start carving full time? And he said, oh, when I was 52 or something thereabouts. Yep. And I was like, I always wanted to go into figurative. And I'm 52. So I was just like, well, you know what? It's either now or never. And I think I can get the feel for what I want to be able to do. I'm not after photorealistic figurative. I'm after a sense of my own design within it. Yep. But it's a big enough challenge to say, well, it'll take me 5 to 10 years to get where I would be able to be reasonable at it. Mm-hmm. And it excites me. It's like I don't want a comfortable carving life. I always want to feel like there's a bit of a challenge.
You need that little bit.
Yeah. So that's my 5 years. Is just to, to have that base with the zooms and with the teaching, and then to let that go and really just spend the last part of my carving career, the last 15 odd years of it, really down in the hole. Yeah, before my hands go, before my brain goes, whatever it be,
That's fantastic. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's obviously taken a fair bit of effort to come out to visit Hape. I mean, he's basically sacrificed his day to show us around Griffith and listen to us prattle on. William's behind the camera there, so he's not on the tools. My mate Martin, who's we haven't been seeing much of here. But if you've got something out of today, if you support us on Patreon, that Patreon support will go to allow me to go and visit other makers like Hape, and to actually show you guys what the life of real craft looks like. So thanks very much for watching, and tell all your mates. Thanks so much, Hape.
Pleasure, buddy. Easy.
Man.
Thanks, guys.